So as we stopped in the first part, I was just going to ask us, what are these acts that can be called terrorist act? And then people shoot each other every day. Husband, wives shoot each other, children shoot fathers, mothers, I don't know what all they do. But what is this terrorism acts all about? So tell me what kinds of horrible activity can we call a terrorist activity?
Well, as I said, there's no perfect definition for terrorism.
Okay.
But now we have what we call a working definition. In fact, I would, in a lighter vein, say it's like there's no perfect definition for love, but I think everybody knows exactly what it is.
Yeah, intuitively we know, okay,
yes.
this is what
So
this
when
is.
we talk about terrorism, the first thing is these acts are committed against non-combatants. People who
So
are...
that is a given. Every time it has to be against a non-combatant to qualify as an act of terror.
As an act of terrorism.
Okay.
Of course, that requires a little bit... I mean, it would take me very long to explain because then you would probably ask me, what about Maoists?
Yeah. No, what about that Japanese thing where they released some deadly gas inside the subway in Tokyo?
Yes. That is, the Aum Shinryu movement was definitely an act of terrorism.
Okay.
All these are acts of terrorism.
Okay. Because it's done against people who really can't.
Yes, an act of terrorism can be motivated not necessarily by a political motive.
Okay.
They can have any other motive also. It can be a religious motive. Today, the UN has a definition which includes all these motivations: political, religious, ethnic.
Okay.
So an act
it's
of
broadening the
yes,
scope of it.
we have to broaden it because we have seen. I mean, terrorism is not a new phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing we have to remember.
Well, historically, how far would you go back to find the first act of terror in your eyes?
The first act of terrorism goes as far back as the Romans.
Okay.
Yeah, because there was this so-called person who was known as the Old Man of the Mountains.
Okay.
And he trained these people who were fed on hashish. And from that you get the word assassins.
Okay, yeah.
That was the band of assassins. And then they went and they killed people. They were sent to kill other rulers.
Strike terror, basically.
Strike terror, kill important
people
people so that it was easier to run over those countries. I mean, that's how it began. But over the years, we've seen during the 60s, 70s, there were a lot of communist groups. Like you had the Japanese Red Cells, you had the Belgian communist cells, then you had...
some in Germany.
Yes, you had the Baader Meinhof in Germany.
Yes.
So you had a lot of these people, but those were ideological. For that matter, even the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, was a politically motivated.
So they were seeking separation from Britain.
They had their own reasons. They had their the Basque separatists.
Yes.
So there were a lot of groups, and over a period of time, even the PLO, over a period of time, they realized that they wanted to join the mainstream.
Okay.
Political mainstream.
Was it because they realized the futility of it, or they lost interest in their own cause?
There were several factors. There were social factors, there were political factors. Even the governments were willing to sit down across the table and talk with them, find out, because as I said, these were politically motivated. So if you address the political questions and situations, there was a good chance that you could talk about it. If you remember in the early days, even the Sri Lankan government, when LTTE was in a position of power, the Sri Lankan government did come to carry on a series of talks by which they wanted to bring them into mainstream, and they called it devolving power. But since the LTTE by then turned into a terrorist organization, as you know, they're proscribed in India. It's a banned organization in India and in several countries all over the world. Their methods changed. Many factors.
Did they lose sight of their ultimate objective and then got sidetracked into just random violence?
Well, I would say their initial objective was to get certain privileges and rights which were denied to the Tamil people in Sri Lanka. So
that part of it, you're okay with that? I mean, you say that's fair enough.
But what happened is, somewhere along the way, they started stressing on a separate nation. And stressing on a separate nation is a question which has to be dealt with the sovereign power of that country. I mean, we know in this country, there have been several times when states have demanded separate nations, and we know exactly how we've handled it. So just as we are not ready to allow any state to claim secession from the Indian Union.
So they were also unwilling.
Obviously, any sovereign country will not be willing to separate a state. What they can do is sit down across the table, have a talk about how much they can give, how much you want, and what we call devolution of power. Ensure that power is devolved in such a way that they have a say in everything, in matters concerning the nation and matters which concern their rights.
Okay.
So coming back to our terrorism question, we find that a lot of organizations, for instance, we have in India what you call the Indian Mujahideen. Now, they just go put bombs on bicycles and motorcycles, and it's happened
outside mosques and temples
it's
and
happened
marketplaces.
in so many cities in the north. You have, over the years, many people have died, and then they go either they do that in places where common people. Sarojini Devi Market, for instance, in Delhi, is not an upmarket place, or it's not a political rally.
Working
just people class. Going and doing their Diwali shopping, which is why I keep saying these people are terrorists. It's plain and simple. You cannot call them freedom fighters. And in a democracy like India, which has a robust judiciary, which has so many ways of addressing issues.
And pretty good laws also?
Absolutely. There is no need, there is no justification for the violence.
Okay. All right. So we're getting a little warmer. So she very clearly established what is acceptable behavior and what is not, and what can be called terrorist acts and what cannot be. So when we come back, let's hear from her what she thinks is the way to get out of this particular problem.